guys! There's a lot of spooky ideas in my new collection of short horror stories called Treacherous Tales. This week's excerpt is the beginning of one story, which is set in a haunted house. The short story is called Howard's End. The house was littered with moving boxes. It had taken most of a day for Howard to unload them from the moving truck. He was meticulous in where each box ended up. They were labeled with letters rather than words, so all boxes marked A, B, and C made their way upstairs to the second floor. Boxes marked D went to the living room, and E and F to the kitchen, etc. A number of the K boxes were carried downstairs into the basement, perhaps to be stored for sorting later. Howard placed each box with precision, like a surgeon. None of the cardboard scraped the walls, which were painted gray. Whomever had sold the house had gotten overly enthusiastic with neutral colors in order to make the sale, and Howard had left it as it was when he bought it. He valued the remote location and the ice-cold walls, which reminded him of the limestone slabs that were carved into angels and placed over the freshly turned earth of the recently deceased. Not that he spent a lot of time in graveyards. He was not partial to burials and had, so far in his 35 years, only been to a funeral once. It was after his mother died when he was 10, and he remembered standing next to his silent father, whose face was red and hard as sun-kissed stone. His mother, Mary, she always told him she was named after a saint, had been cremated after the funeral home transported her from the house. It had taken several days, perhaps a week, for them to return her back to the family in altered form, and a few more days after that for the funeral to be completed. The ceremony was held in his mother's church, and the attendance was sparse. It wasn't until later that Howard realized that his father hadn't advertised his mother's death, but let the announcement slide from his mind, as he did so many things. There was no backup family member to help, and no one else to arrange such things as flowers, songs to be sung, guests to pay their respects. Perhaps it was too much trouble. Perhaps it was merely because his father had no space to mourn. After the ceremony, they drove over to the cemetery. Howard held the urn on his lap and stared at it and willed something to happen. He rubbed it with the side of his sleeve because wasn't that how genies appeared? But no such luck. The rubbing only gave him a dirty cuff. It was hard for Howard to picture that this round, tin-like object contained what was left of his mother, especially when they got to their purchased tiny plot of land on a vast landscape of green grass and gray tombstones. It was hard for him to realize that this was it for his mom. He had been the one to carry the urn to the gravesite, and his steps had shaken the urn as he walked. It rattled in a most unpleasant manner, like a snake in the grass. There were no words said over her burial. His father took the urn from him and tossed it into the dirty hole. It landed with a thud and one last death rattle. Howard stared down into the hole as his dad turned away. He couldn't wrap his mind around this act. All they buried was a silver urn, which had nothing to do with his mother. Nothing to do with her gentle smiles at him after his dad had left for work. Nothing to do with the way she sang him a lullaby to put him to bed, long after he knew he was too old for songs. And nothing to do with the way she died. After her funeral, Howard had learned a new level of what family meant, and it was not something to be cherished or remembered. When he left home at 18 into the Army's tender care, he had never looked back, not once. A house was a stepping stone for him. He had grown up in apartments, moving from one to the other when the rent money dried up and his dad drank their way from one eviction to another. Buying a house was next level, a fantasy that existed only in TV shows and movies, the ones where the mothers were still alive and dads didn't solve problems with their fists. If you'd like to find out what happens to Howard, sign up for my mailing list on my website, authorversusai.com. I'll be releasing the full version of it with my newsletter next week. And next week, I'm going to head into the past for some inspiration for my new novel. Tune in tomorrow to see what I mean.